Well, for the Mopar fans, I have a forward-look Chrysler, a 1958 Plymouth Fury. The Fury was introduced in 1956, and in 1956 and 7 was only available in sandstone white with the gold anodized trim. And here in 58, they went to what was called buckskin beige with the gold anodized trim on the side. The car was restyled in 57, and really that restyling was rushed to market quite quickly, but just set a new trend in design that put GM and Ford back on their heels. Even the interior was cool. Look at this stand-up freestanding mirror, and then the defroster vents, the little circular cutouts there in the dash. What an amazing looking car, though. And again, this was a car that really set, in particular, GM, which was the style leader, back on their heels and scared them candidly. There are quite a few stories of GM executives seeing these vehicles coming off the line, sitting in the lots at the factories in Detroit, and panicking because they look so much more futuristic than anything that GM was planning to come out with for a number of model years. And you think about some of the GM vehicles in 57 and 58 that just had tons of chrome, all different stuff all over. By 59, they had started to trim some of that chrome off. But this Chrysler was far ahead of its time in terms of its styling. And it's, hard to even say what's the flaw in terms of the styling of this car. It's just absolutely gorgeous. And under the hood, these Furies were powered by a 318 V8 with two 4-barrel carburetors making 290 horsepower. In 58, you could get an optional 350 cubic inch motor that also had two 4-barrels making 305 horsepower and a Bendix fuel injection option as well. It made 315 horsepower, but I believe all the Bendix fuel injection cars were recalled. They also had that Bendix fuel injection on other Chrysler products like the 300 at the time as well. Now, in addition to being restyled for 57 with this very dramatic styling and the big tail fins that proliferated the Chrysler lineup at the time, the car also changed its front suspension and began Chrysler's Torsion Air Ride setup with the torsion bar front that would carry on for many years. Take a look at the steering wheel. It says power steering in the middle. These cars had very, very easy power steering. Well, easier, I would say, than even the power steerings of the 60s and 70s. But what a styling masterpiece done by Virgil Exner, who would remain in charge of Chrysler styling for a few more years until the vehicles that he introduced in the early 60s flopped and he was fired, and Chrysler replaced him with Elwood Engel from Ford. And you'll notice, consequently, that the Chryslers of the mid-60s are far more tame, if you will, than the styling of the late 50s, early 60s. Chrysler really wanted just to get back toward the mainstream to help sales after some of Virgil Exner's last designs flopped in the marketplace. But this was a beautiful car, and customers saw it as being beautiful at the time. And as I said, it was something that GM essentially tore up all of their 1957 plans and redid them for the 1959 model year after they saw this vehicle, because it was such a dramatic departure from what they were anticipating. Now, the Fury continued on into the 1989 model year, albeit by its final years, it was more of a taxi cab fleet vehicle and entry-level rear-wheel drive sedan, much different from the sporty vehicle that you see here with gorgeous proportions and a number of unique styling features. But after 56 and the introduction of 56 and 57, and then this 58 model, in 1959, Plymouth introduced the Sport Fury. So the Sport Fury became the top-of-the-line vehicle. The Fury became kind of the midline. And then in 1960, the car was significantly redesigned, and they went to a unibody setup for the vehicle as opposed to body on frame. And Chrysler continued that torsion bar front, leaf spring rear, unibody setup all the way until that last Fury was produced in 1989, albeit that last Fury had transversely mounted torsion bars in the front as opposed to this, which has longitudinally mounted torsion bars running front to rear. So these cars not only set the trend in style for the industry, they also set a lot of parameters for how Chrysler would engineer vehicles going forward, specifically with respect to the suspension setup and this torsionaire ride, as it was called. And as an interesting tidbit, while the mainstream Chrysler vehicles went to unibody in 1960, the Imperial did not go to unibody until 1967. It stayed body on frame for a number of years beyond the more mainstream Chrysler products. One other interesting bit of history with respect to the Fury nameplate is it seems Chrysler could never quite figure out if they wanted the Fury to be a full-size or a mid-size car. So the Fury was a full-size car through the 1961 model year. Then it transitioned to being a mid-size car from 1962 to 1964. Then from 1965 to 1974 went back to being a full-size car. Then from 1975 through 1988, it went back to being a mid-size car and sold alongside the Grand Fury, which became the full-size car. So Chrysler just really couldn't decide what to do with the nameplate. It kept going up and down in size class. And I don't know if that contributed to some of the issues that Chrysler ended up having over the years, but they certainly had some product planning fumbles really with the Plymouth lineup. And as I was mentioning, the largest vehicles in the Plymouth lineup being mid-size cars, starting with that 1962 model year. And it almost seems like Chrysler never quite recovered from that fumble. They went then very conventional on the styling in the mid-60s, but they never quite got the mojo back that they had with these late 50s era vehicles, albeit they produced a number of handsome cars. And Elwood Engel's last hurrah, the New Yorker Brougham, that were produced until 1978. Those are some of my favorites. But this, if you're a Mopar lover, is the pinnacle. Thanks for watching.